In this terrifying story, I will share a real experience that I lived through in my new clinic. This clinic was originally a mental asylum, and I discovered it was filled with angry spirits that still inhabit the place. Get ready for an unforgettable and thrilling experience. When I first stepped into my new clinic, I was filled with a sense of excitement and anticipation. The building had a certain old-world charm, with its Victorian architecture and high ceilings. However, there was something unsettling about the place that I couldn't quite put my finger on. As I began to settle in, I noticed small oddities. Doors that I had closed were suddenly open, and I often heard faint whispers and footsteps when no one else was around. At first, I dismissed these occurrences as my imagination playing tricks on me, but as the days passed, the disturbances became more pronounced. One evening, after a long day of seeing patients, I decided to explore the basement. I had been avoiding it since I moved in, partly because of its dark and foreboding appearance. Armed with a flashlight, I descended the creaky wooden stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and a musty odor filled my nostrils. In the dim light, I saw rows of old medical equipment covered in dust. It was clear that this basement hadn't been touched in years. As I moved deeper into the space, I stumbled upon a locked door. Curiosity got the better of me, and I managed to find an old key hanging nearby that fit perfectly into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a room that looked like it had been untouched for decades. On the walls hung portraits of doctors and nurses from a bygone era, their eyes seemingly following me as I moved. In the center of the room stood a large wooden table, and on it, a collection of patient records. As I skimmed through the records, I realized that this clinic had once been a mental asylum. The files detailed the harrowing experiences of the patients, many of whom had suffered severe and inhumane treatments. A sense of dread washed over me as I read about the tormented souls who had been confined here. That night, the disturbances escalated. As I tried to sleep, I was awakened by loud banging sounds coming from the basement. Gathering my courage, I went to investigate. To my horror, I saw shadowy figures moving about, and the air was thick with a sense of anger and sorrow. The next few days were a blur of terrifying encounters. Patients reported feeling cold spots and seeing apparitions during their visits. One of my colleagues, who was helping me set up the clinic, decided to quit after experiencing a particularly frightening episode. Determined to uncover the truth, I delved deeper into the history of the building. I learned that the asylum had been shut down following a scandal involving the mistreatment and mysterious deaths of several patients. It was said that the spirits of those who had died in agony still haunted the place, seeking justice and peace. With this knowledge, I decided to reach out to a local historian and a paranormal investigator. Together, we conducted a thorough investigation of the clinic. Using special equipment, the investigator was able to capture several EVP, electronic voice phenomena recordings. The voices on the recordings were clear and filled with pain, pleading for help. One night, during a particularly intense session, we managed to make contact with one of the spirits. It was the voice of a young woman who had been a patient. She spoke of the cruel treatments she had endured and begged for release. It was a chilling and heart-wrenching experience. In an effort to bring peace to the restless spirits, we decided to hold a cleansing ritual. The historian and the investigator guided me through the process, using sage, holy water, and prayers to cleanse the space. As the ritual progressed, the atmosphere in the clinic began to change. The air felt lighter, and the oppressive feeling that had been hanging over the place lifted. After the cleansing, the disturbances decreased significantly. There were still occasional odd occurrences, but nothing as severe as before. I continued my practice, always mindful of the history of the building and respectful of the spirits that still lingered. Reflecting on my experience, I realized that the clinic had become more than just a place of work. It had become a reminder of the importance of compassion and empathy, not only for the living but also for those who had suffered in the past. The spirits of the asylum had taught me a valuable lesson about the lingering effects of trauma and the need for healing and closure. As weeks and months passed, I became accustomed to the presence of the spirits in the clinic. There was a constant feeling of being watched, but I learned to live with it. Some nights were quiet, while others were filled with disturbances, where sounds and shadows became more pronounced. One of the most terrifying moments I experienced was on a cold winter night. I was working late in my office, reviewing some files when the electricity suddenly went out. The darkness was thick and seemed to swallow everything around me. Grabbing my flashlight, I cautiously moved through the dark hallways. As I made my way to the basement, I heard faint sobbing. The sound was coming from the locked room I had discovered on my first day. When I opened the door, I saw a ghostly image of a young woman crying. As I tried to approach her, she vanished suddenly, leaving behind a deep sense of sorrow. In the days that followed, I focused on uncovering more about the woman I had seen. With the help of the historian, I managed to identify her. Her name was Elizabeth, and she had been one of the patients who suffered the most in the old asylum. Her story was tragic, filled with tales of abuse and mistreatment by the doctors and nurses. I decided to honor her memory and show respect to her and the other spirits. Along with the historian and the paranormal investigator, we organized a small memorial ceremony in the locked room. We invited some members of the local community, including those familiar with the history of the asylum. During the ceremony, we spoke about Elizabeth and the other patients who had suffered there. We read their names aloud and lit candles in their memory. The atmosphere was deeply moving, and it felt like we were providing some form of peace to the spirits. After the ceremony, I noticed a significant change in the clinic. The terrifying occurrences lessened, and a sense of tranquility began to prevail. It felt as though the spirits had accepted our efforts and were more at ease. Over time, the clinic transformed into a place of healing, not just for new patients, but also for the spirits that had been trapped there. My experience at the clinic became a profound lesson about spiritual power and the deep impact of the past on the present. I realized that this journey was not just about confronting fear, but about gaining a deeper understanding of the spiritual world and connecting with the supernatural. I developed a greater respect for the spirits that roam this world and believed that every spirit has a story worth telling and listening to.